So before we talk about lead poisoning, let's discuss lead. Lead is a toxic metal that is harmful to human health. There is no safe level for lead exposure. The degree of exposure depends on the concentration of lead, the route of exposure, whether by air, water, or food, your current medical condition, and your age. It's been estimated that up to 20% of the total lead exposure in children can be attributed to a waterborne route. For example, the water that you give your child to drink, the tap water. In addition, infants, fetuses, young children are particularly vulnerable to lead poisoning. This is because they usually consume more water and their bodies are actively developing. This facilitates the bioaccumulation of lead. Now, in high levels, lead contamination in a child can result in convulsions, major neurological damage, organ failure, coma, and ultimately death. Moderate to low levels of exposure may result in hearing loss, may inhibit growth, and cause learning disabilities. At times, there will be no signs of lead poisoning in the child, or the signs could even mimic a flu or other gastrointestinal diseases. The symptoms may include cramps, irritability, fatigue, vomiting, constipation, sleep disorders, poor appetite, and trouble sleeping. Unlike other contaminants, lead will accumulate within the body over time. Lead tends to be stored in the brain, the bones, the kidneys, and many other major organs. It can be stored in a child's blood for months and in the child's bones for many decades. While some of the effects of lead poisoning cannot be cured, it is possible to reduce the exposure. By definition, lead is a soft, bluish-gray metal. Lead occurs naturally, but much of its presence in the environment stems from its historic use in paint and gasoline, and from ongoing or historic mining and commercial operations. Currently, lead exists in both organic and inorganic forms. In its inorganic lead, inorganic lead, as in paint, soil, various commercial products, including gasoline and exhausts. These contributed to the ambient inorganic lead contamination that many suffer from today. Organic leads, leaded gasoline contained organic lead before it was burned. However, since the elimination of lead from gasoline in the United States starting in 1976, exposure to organic lead is generally limited to an occupational context. However, organic lead can be more toxic than inorganic lead because the body more readily absorbs it. Therefore, potential exposure to organic lead should always be taken very seriously. Lead is very stable and resistant to corrosion, although acidic water may leach out of pipes, fittings, and solder. It does not conduct electricity, and lead is an effective shield against radiation. Because of these properties, and because it is relatively easy to mine and work with, lead has been used for many purposes for thousands of years. Ancient Romans used lead for plumbing, among other uses. In modern times, lead was added to paint and gasoline to improve their performance, but again was eliminated in the 70s due to health concerns. Accumulation of lead is the result of anthropogenic use, which is concentrated lead throughout the environment. Because lead is spread so widely throughout the environment, it can be found in everyone's body today. The levels found today in most people are orders of magnitude greater than that of ancient times. These levels are within an order of magnitude of levels that have resulted in adverse health effects. Now let's discuss the lead in drinking water. Lead can occur in your drinking water through leaching from lead-contained pipes, faucets, and solder. This can be found in many older buildings. Homes built before 1986 are more likely to have lead pipes, fixtures, and solder, although newer homes may also be at risk. It is important to note that occupational exposures can also result in secondary exposure for the workers' families if the workers bring home lead-contaminated dust on their skin, clothing, or shoes. Your children may also be exposed to occupational lead sources if you, the parent, work in those types of industries and allow your children to visit you at work. A secondary exposure can occur by the worker showering and or changing clothes or shoes after returning home. Therefore, if you work in those environments, it is safe to clean yourself before entering the home. Exposure to lead can happen several ways: through the mouth, through the nose, and sometimes through the skin. Dermal exposure plays a role for exposure to organic lead among workers, but is not considered a significant pathway for the general population. Organic lead can be absorbed directly through the skin.
Melissa Mays doesn't have to wait to see what effects the water will have on her kids.
All three of my sons are suffering the side effects of heavy metals poisoning.
So paying a monthly bill isn't at the top of her list.
It seems unreal that they're still billing us for water that we cannot use, and they've told us not to use.
When pediatricians hear anything about lead, we absolutely freak out.
It wasn't a freak out at first, but doctors in Flint started hearing whispers about elevated lead levels in the water in 2014. So Dr. Mona Hana-Atisha started looking at lead levels in her young patients, and what she found was shocking.
The percentage of children with lead poisoning doubled in the city of Flint. And In some neighborhoods, it actually tripled.
She sounded the alarm to state officials as loudly as she could, but no one listened. Instead,
We were attacked. So I was called an unfortunate researcher, that I was causing near hysteria, and that the state numbers were not consistent with our findings.
maybe denial was so easy because of this. Flint, a city surrounded by some of the largest freshwater lakes in the world, was now delivering some of the world's most contaminated water to its citizens.
In October of 2014, General Motors, you say, stopped using the water because it was corroding their parts.
Right.
That seems like a pretty obvious clue.
Yeah, so red flags, like loud alarms, should have been going off in people's brains. If it's corroding engine parts, what is it doing to our plumbing that is predominantly lead-based?
Water that could corrode engine parts.
My nephews have lead poisoning. My kids don't got it, but there's no telling what the next 5 years is going to bring for them. So,
Bill Schutte says that if you can't drink the water,
you shouldn't pay for it.
Mayor Karen Weaver agrees, but also notes that the city has a legal obligation to bill for services provided by its Utility Services Department.
Some people have not been paying their bills. The people that are, we thank them because we know we need money coming in.
Help is on the way. Want to reach out and help? Governor Rick Snyder today signed a bill that sets aside $3 million to assist Flint with unpaid water bills.
The symptoms of the lead poisoning. So the lead poisoning symptoms, they are divided into the two parts: acute poisoning and chronic poisoning. Metallic test. Cramp in legs, and also there is a joint pain which is called as the arthralgia. Headache, then sleeplessness, tremors in the fingers, mouth and eyes. Then there is a loss of the vision. Then paralysis. So here paralysis of the upper limb or lower limb. Then hallucinations. And delirium. That is the sudden or severe confusion. Again, there is a delirium.
Once absorbed into the body, lead may be stored for long periods in mineralizing tissue, such as your teeth and bones. The stored lead may be released again into the bloodstreams, especially in times of calcium stress, like pregnancy, lactation, osteoporosis, or simple calcium deficiency. Not quite so simple. It is important to note that children who live in older houses are more likely to have elevated lead levels than the population of U.S. children as a whole. Because of their behavior and physiology, children are more affected by exposure to lead than adults. Children absorb more ingested lead than do adults. Children generally ingest lead-contaminated soil and house dust at higher rates than adults because of mouthing and hand-to-mouth behaviors. Children who exhibit pica, a compulsive hand-to-mouth behavior, and repeated eating of non-food items are at greatest risk. Children have a higher breathing rate than adults, breathing in a greater amount of lead-contaminated dust and soil, as well as fumes close to the ground. In addition, the percent of lead absorbed in the gut, especially in an empty stomach, is estimated to be as much as 5 to 10 times greater in infants and young children than in adults.
They explain that the EPA began testing the soil at all properties in Zone 1 in late 2014 and released the results of the city to the city on May 24th. The results showed the soil at nearly every property in West Calumet exceeded the EPA's 1,200 parts per million threshold for emergency cleanup. At one property, the lead concentration was found to be more than 91,000 parts per million. So the limit for emergency is supposed to be 1,200. It was at 91,000. Now, as you're going to see, one of you guys took action on that in a second. Okay, but I want to tell you, but that's the lead. I want to tell you about the arsenic too. The highest arsenic level found before 2012 was 567 parts per million, according to the record of decision. Arsenic levels of more than 26.4 parts per million in residential areas trigger an EPA cleanup. So we've got a situation down here, and they're writing about this now, but they wrote about it in the past as well. So a little over 26 parts per million in arsenic levels, emergency cleanup. Some parts here in the area that we covered, 567.
What triggers a cleanup is 400 parts per million. And what we're seeing is as high as 91,000 parts per million.
Poisoning us, and not only us, but our babies. Those are the ones that are being affected. And I feel awful that I allow my children to be in this environment.
This neighborhood was built 44 years ago. It was known to be built on a lead smeltering plant or several lead smeltering plants.
People put greed over health, and to have 360 residences demolished by January 1st. That's a huge loss to this community.
Here's from the Times of Northwest Indiana. Housing and Urban Development spokesman Jerry Ann Brown said Friday the federal agency released just over $1.9 million to the local housing authority to relocate residents. Morgan, the city attorney, said she was told by HUD and East Chicago Housing Authority officials that HUD would begin making relocation vouchers available starting Thursday to residents in batches of 50. The vouchers will be distributed based on a priority system developed in a partnership with the EPA, she said. Families with the most vulnerable populations, including pregnant women and young children, would be the first to receive vouchers. Officials also will be considering whether anyone in the households have tested positive for lead. And we told you.
In speech class, we do some activities with our speech, and that it helped me to to get my sound, the SH sound out of my mouth, not out of my cheeks.
So lead is a problem because it's one of the most potent, or if not the most potent, neurotoxin that can affect children. Kids that are affected by lead can have behavioral problems, be diagnosed with ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, have difficulty in school, they have lower rates of high school graduation, they have higher rates of aggressive behaviors, they have more interaction with the juvenile justice system.
A typical setup for a lead remediation project would entail enclosing the area with plastic duct tape and proper signage.
Children's developing brains and nervous systems are very sensitive to lead.
We're heavy, and I don't mean fat. We're heavy with metals. Nearly 40% of us have toxic levels of lead and don't know it. But so what if we don't have symptoms? Well, first, many of us do have symptoms, but just don't know it. In fact, we may attribute problems to be something else when in fact it could be from low-level lead poisoning. You may have headaches, insomnia, be irritable, have a low sex drive or a tremor. You may have mood problems, nausea, depression, memory problems. You might have trouble concentrating, poor coordination, or even constipation. This is potentially a greater risk for heart disease than even cholesterol, but this is not the first indication of problems with lead. In fact, a report in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that high blood pressure in postmenopausal women is strongly correlated to blood lead levels. So why is that? Well, during menopause, bones break down faster, releasing stored lead and injuring blood vessels, leading to high blood pressure. And we also found out that high lead may also be responsible for kidney failure. A study in the New England Journal of Medicine found that using chelation therapy with EDTA in patients with kidney failure to reduce lead levels could prevent further loss of kidney function and save billions of dollars in healthcare costs and millions of people would not need dialysis. Wow. Digest that, right? Chelation therapy saves lives in billions. Why are doctors not offering this as standard treatment? Not only does this cause heart disease, high blood pressure, and kidney failure, but it's connected to the epidemic of children with ADD, developmental problems, learning problems, and autism. Even though the safe level of lead has been set at 10 micrograms per deciliter in the blood, recent studies show that the greatest drop-off in IQ scores in children happens between a level of 1 and 10 micrograms per deciliter, so much lower. The lead is found in our soil and water. In fact, we live in a sea of heavy metals. In areas with a history of industrial pollution, people attract lead into their homes from contaminated soils. Regular house dust often contains 17 times the background level of lead.
The level of lead in your bone, according to Harvard, published in the Journal of the AMA, level of lead in your bone determines how soon you go blind with things like cataracts, because lead in the bone is in equilibrium with your heart and your lung and your bone and your brain.
Childhood lead exposure has been associated with the following: higher absenteeism in school, lower class rank, poorer vocabulary and grammatical reasoning scores, longer reaction times, poorer hand-eye coordination. The incomplete development of the blood-brain barrier in fetuses and in very young children up to 36 months of age increases the risk of lead's entry into the developing nervous system. This can result in prolonged or permanent neurobehavioral disorders. Children's renal, endocrine, and hematological systems may also be adversely affected by lead exposure. Remember, there is no known threshold exposure level for lead. No blood lead threshold for adverse health effects has been identified in children. Most adult exposures are occupational and occur in lead-related industries, such again as lead smelting, refining, and manufacturing industries. One frequent source of lead exposure to adults is home renovation that involves scraping, remodeling, or otherwise distributing lead-based paint. Renovation involving lead-based paint should only be undertaken after proper training or with the use of certified personnel. Adults can also be exposed during certain hobbies and activities where lead is used. Some of the more common examples include painters, artistic painting, car repair, electronic soldering, glass or metal soldering, glazed or pottery making, molding of bullets, slugs, or fishing sinkers, stained glass makers, target shooters, target shooting. Now this brings up the subject of guns and bullets. Check this out.
Let me talk to you just a minute about when we say insidious and chronic, it means that things come on health-wise we don't even know about. We blame it on other things. A lead level of less than 10 can create high blood pressure and cardiac problems. My blood level was greater than 10 when I shot at that indoor range. It took me over 6 months to get it back to normal, doing nothing and just letting my body urinate it out. That's a little scary thing. I didn't have a heart attack. I could have. What other things can happen? Neurologically, encephalopathy. That's the brain not functioning well. Neuropathy. That's nerve ending problems. That's not being able to feel, not being able to walk. Anything with the central nervous system can occur with lead. Kidney problems can occur with lead. These aren't toxicity problems necessarily. These are chronic, insidious problems that happens with lead in our system. Weight loss, digestive problems, depression, headache. Well, these are all problems a lot of people have, and it's like, whoa, that could be lead toxicity. All of those can be. Now, acute lead toxicity by OSHA standards is 50 to 70 micrograms per deciliter. Okay, that's big time high. OSHA standards puts 40 as abnormal. Most laboratories put 10 as abnormal. If you get up around 70, you're probably going to be in a situation where you're going to be hospitalized, put on chelating agents that go in and chelate that lead and get it out of your system, because then you're in danger of dying from the lead toxicity. So it is significant. This is a significant thing, y'all, that we need to address and be aware of.
Lead serves no useful purpose in the human body, but its presence in the body can lead to toxic effects, regardless of exposure pathway. Lead toxicity can affect every organ in the system. On a molecular level, proposed mechanisms for toxicity involve fundamental biochemical processes. These include lead's ability to inhibit or mimic the actions of calcium and to interact with proteins, amine, phosphate, and carboxyl. Again, it must be emphasized that there may be no threshold for developmental effects on children. Some researchers have suggested that lead continues to contribute significantly to socio-behavioral problems such as juvenile delinquency and violent crime. Therefore, it is important to prevent all lead exposures. Now, some children may appear to be asymptomatic. Some adults may appear to be asymptomatic. Yet, they may experience neurological effects from lead exposure. Your doctor should have a high index of suspicion for lead exposure, especially in the case of children. So unless you know what's coming through your pipes, unless you know what's in the soil around you, in the air, in your workplace, is it possible that our level of anger, the fighting, the aggression, our general everyday misdiagnosed malaise, could this be attributed?
And what are the health effects at all those various levels from lead?
I have another table. This one lets me show you quickly that at very high levels, as high as 150, and much higher ones have actually been recorded, death can occur. Below that, there can be, there used to be in olden days children who convulsed or became comatose as a result of high lead levels. And that's an indication of encephalopathy or damage to the brain, and nephropathy of damage to kidneys. Anemia is a very characteristic symptom of lead poisoning. Children could have colic. And the reason that, I'm going to put this down because I want to say that the reason that lead is so toxic is that it interferes with, it interacts with a whole range of essential enzymes that are critical to the physiologic function of ourselves as organisms, other organisms as well. And that kind of wide-ranging enzymatic dysfunction causes a whole wide...
I think it is important for us to have a look at these things for ourselves. It's beautiful to research the sky. It's beautiful to research the stars, the sun and the moon. But let's take a look down here at what's got us feeling this need, this aggression.
As the levels go up, once again, the percentage of children with high attention deficits increases. And also this is true of bone. There's been a recent study that has shown that if you can measure the levels of lead in bone, and rank them, and if teachers and parents rank the children with respect to aggression or antisocial behavior or whatever, there is a correlation. We're careful not to say that it's the cause.
Corinne Gaines posted this video to her Instagram account yesterday, talking to her son during an armed standoff with police.
Do you want to go out there?
No. Gaines, they say, used a legally purchased 12-gauge pistol-grip shotgun to hold them at bay, showing it as soon as they arrived to serve a warrant for minor charges. Gaines' motive, unknown. We do know she suffered from lead poisoning, which can interfere with rational thinking. According to records from a lawsuit she'd filed against several landlords, a doctor said Corinne was exposed to a sea of lead when she lived in lead-contaminated housing. She does have a neurodevelopmental disability and brain damage. And her mother said in a disposition she didn't want to listen. She has poor decision-making skills. I think she needs guidance. All characteristics, advocates say, of the effects of lead poisoning.
It's something that a lot of us are feeling. And our doctors, our local drugstores, are nothing more than a Band-Aid when the problem could be literally right under our feet. Do you know someone who's angry? Do you have a lot of family members who are angry and fight constantly? Do you have more than one relative who has a clear learning disability or a neurological disorder? Is it possible that heavy metal poisoning is to blame? We are aware of heavy metal poisoning and its effects to some degree as many parents fight against vaccination for their children out of fear of what is being injected in them, when we know there was an early time, the 70s, 80s, 60s, when mercury was being included in certain vaccinations. Could this heavy metal poisoning have created the world we know now, with the mental disorders that we watch take over our loved ones? We can see this right here, right now, in America today. Does your state's water supply contain high levels of lead in the water? In a recent 2016 report conducted using this data from the EPA's Safe Drinking Water Information System database, over 6 million people and 2,000 water systems have excessive lead levels in the drinking water over a 4-year span. If you are within the United States, does your home show up anywhere here for higher levels of lead in your drinking water?
Next week, you can go online and order these little things that look like Q-tips and a little solution, and you can rub them on these plates and dishes and things that you have, and put a few drops of the solution on, and it'll turn a color if it's, I think it's yellow, if it's leaching lead. But you can get about 200 or 100 of these swabs for about $40. If you go to Lowe's or Home Depot and get these swabs there, you get 2 or 3 swabs for $4. But you can go and get them en masse for if you want to test people or if you want to have them in your office for demonstration.
Cincinnati has some of the safest water in the nation. When that water leaves the filtration plant, it's specially treated to prevent any lead from going along with it. But depending on the age of your house or business, you might need to do something else. There are 3 types of water lines. First is the main. That's the big line like this that takes the water from the filtration plant into your neighborhood. Then there's the service line, which goes from the main up to your property. And then there's your line, which goes from the service line into your house. The big mains and most of the service lines are not made of lead, but if your house or business was built before 1927, the personal line into your house might be. Jeff Sweatfager of Cincinnati Waterworks shows us how you can tell.
There's plastic pipes, which would be pretty easy to spot, but you could also have some galvanized steel, copper, or lead pipes. And the easy way to tell is copper. Well, copper pipes, there'll be, of course, the copper color. If it's painted, you could really easily just take a coin and scrape the paint off, and you can see the color of the copper. If it's a galvanized steel pipe, you try to scratch it, you're not going to be able to make a mark in that. However, if it's a lead pipe, if you take an object like a coin or maybe a key or something and you scratch it, it comes up very shiny, it scratches very easily. So that's how you can tell if you have a lead line coming into your house.
Then what?
If you have a lead line coming into your house, we highly recommend that you get it replaced.
Which is your financial responsibility. Waterworks crews will replace lead service lines, but the lines directly into your house are up to you.
Says you can test your own water right in your own home. Tell us how you do that, Natalie.
Well, Carol, you'll need a kit like this one, and you can just pick this up at any hardware store. And it's a pretty simple process once you have it.
If you are interested in knowing if your water is
safe
or not, you're not really sure.
Well, there's a testing kit for that, and you don't have to be a chemist to use it.
It's actually very simple. Instructions are very set on just basically putting the water into the beaker and putting the proper tablets or the proper testing strips inside of them to tell them exactly what they're looking at inside of the water.
And you have
right
this,
here.
which tells you.
Correct. You have the different colors and tells you where the amount that you have of each one of these are in here as well.
Okay. These kits test for a number of things like copper, iron.
There's one lead test strip is inside of this, one pesticides test strip.
Water filters help with small traces of those things, but for example, if you find a high amount of lead in your water, a filter isn't going to do much. In that case, call your water provider.
Lead serves no useful purpose in the human body, but its presence in the body can lead to toxic effects, regardless of exposure pathway. Lead toxicity can affect every organ in the system. On a molecular level, proposed mechanisms for toxicity involve fundamental biochemical processes. These include lead's ability to inhibit or mimic the actions of calcium and to interact with proteins, amine, phosphate, and carboxyl. Again, it must be emphasized that there may be no threshold for developmental effects on children. Some researchers have suggested that lead continues to contribute significantly to socio-behavioral problems such as juvenile delinquency and violent crime. Therefore, it is important to prevent all lead exposures. Now, some children may appear to be asymptomatic. Some adults may appear to be asymptomatic. Yet, they may experience neurological effects from lead exposure. Your doctor should have a high index of suspicion for lead exposure, especially in the case of children. So unless you know what's coming through your pipes, unless you know what's in the soil around you, in the air, in your workplace, is it possible that our level of anger, the fighting, the aggression, our general everyday misdiagnosed malaise, could this be attributed to lead? I think it is important for us to have a look at these things for ourselves. It's beautiful to research the sky. It's beautiful to research the stars, the sun and the moon. But let's take a look down here at what's got us feeling this need, this aggression. It's something that a lot of us are feeling. And our doctors, our local drugstores, are nothing more than a Band-Aid when the problem could be literally right under our feet.